Once you have your piece, you then need to treat the plaster, simply because if you pour plaster on top of plaster, I'm saying plaster so much, aren't I? Plaster, plaster, plaster. If you're pouring plaster on top of plaster, it will stick.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. Please help this channel by hitting the subscribe button. This week we're going to Leighton to meet artist, designer and ceramicist Giuseppe Parrinello. I first came across Giuseppe's work on Instagram, and that was, I think, at least 3 years ago, because that's I can see that that's when I first reposted his work. But I can't remember exactly when I first clicked follow. I just know that his pieces caught my eye because they are very skillful, precise and confident. There's also a Greco-Roman theme running through his work that I really like. Let's get into it. Hi Giuseppe.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. We're here in your studio in Leighton.
Yes.
It's a really nice size, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a nice size. It's good. It's nice and it's long.
Yeah.
Which does feel quite nice.
Because you started, so you told me that you're friends with Lily Permain, right?
Yes.
And you guys started out together at, is it Turning Earth?
Turning Earth, yeah.
Yeah, so that's like a shared
So
space?
it was a open access studio. And I worked there as a technician, kind of like sort of helped sort of set the studio up initially. And she was a member. And yeah, we just became friends from there. So we all had the same sort of, there's like a whole group of us actually that has moved from Turning Earth that are still like in contact with each other.
That's really nice.
So yeah, it's nice actually, it's quite a nice like community.
Yeah, I think I really get that sense from talking with different potters. That, yeah, there's definitely a strong sense of community and helping each other out, and like, you know, even just when it comes to like technical questions.
Yeah,
like,
we're nice guys. We're nice. We like to help people out.
And so is this your first studio on your own? Like how many studios have you had leading up to this?
So this is my first studio. So I've been doing ceramics for, I would say like 14 years, but for, sorry, not 14 years. God, like 10 years. Let's say 10 years. 35 years I've been doing ceramics. How old are you? So I've been doing it for 10 years. And so I was at Turning Earth, so I was a technician there. So I worked them for quite a while, and I actually left there a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
To set up my own studio.
Oh, cool. So this is actually your first.
This is my first ever
space that's
studio.
like really your own, and where you can sort of spread out.
Yeah, I mean that's why I have like so many pictures up, because I think when I first got my studio, I was like all these like loose like sheets that I had. I was like, that's going up, that's going up, that's going up, that's going up.
Oh, that's cool.
Like claiming my space.
Yeah, I love that.
Like it must look like a studio.
That's great. So for those in the audience who don't know you, can you introduce what you do?
So I'm a ceramic artist, and I would maybe say designer. Or at least I'm specialising in ceramics. And sort of not like Lee. So I think most people, when they think of ceramics, they think of like a wheel, they think of, you know, a ball of clay. I don't do any of that.
Yeah.
So I'm like on the other spectrum of ceramics. So I do mould making. Okay. So I make, I deal with plaster a lot more than I do sort of really deal with clay. So my models are made from plaster first of all, and then I use slip, which is liquid clay, which you then pour into plaster molds. Okay. So it's a good way, if you want to do sort of production batch things, it's always quite a good way to get into mold making, because they are going to be completely identical all the way through.
Right, so it's reproducible.
Yes.
And like you get a consistent kind of result.
Yes.
Okay.
So mold making is like that, it's pouring liquid clay into molds. So it's a cavity. So what we're trying to do is create a cavity of a shape or form that we want to reproduce. And that can sort of really be any form that we want, right? So I'll show you, like, for instance, what I've done. So for instance, like these pieces here, these are ceramic candlestick holders. And this is a...
I own one of these.
So these are actually two separate parts, and then they're then joined together. So I actually designed these, and then got a very clever person to... Is it called CAD? Do we still call it CAD?
CAD? Yeah.
I'm so analog. He did it on the computer for me, and 3D printed them. So these are the masters. So when we do mold making, we sometimes talk of masters, and the masters is the original piece that we're then making a mold of. Okay. So these are just sort of resin printed.
So you've drawn this, in this instance, you've passed it on to someone to do the 3D drawing, 3D printing, and you get this back, and this is your master.
Yes.
Cool.
And sort of whenever I'm designing a shape as well, I'm always kind of thinking about it, because I obviously come from a mold making perspective, I'm always trying to think, what's the best way to get something mold? Like, easily.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people think of mold making, they think, oh, it's like 10 or 15 pieces. And they're also quite surprised when it's like, oh no, like what you want to do is really keep it down to like, ideally 2.
Yeah.
Ideally 2.
Yeah. But you were telling me in terms of this piece that because, you know, when you were saying about like thinking about how it's going to come out, like this is actually the kind of tricky part, right?
Yes.
Because if this was like full, if it was just the shell itself, you could have it in 2 parts and it would easily come out. But then here it's like...
So I could have done like a horizontal split here to make that 2 parts. So then it effectively comes off like that. But obviously, because of this hole here, that's where the candlestick goes into. I've had to mark it off differently. So this is actually a 3-part mold. And I can show you a bit of those later on. So on this piece here, what I've done is I've marked out my seam lines.
And so, oh yes, I can see one here.
Yes, there's one there. There's one runs across here. So this is actually a 3-part mold.
Right.
So I've got one section that comes off here.
Yeah.
And then these 2
on the sides.
On the side there. Because ideally, when you're making mold, you don't really want loads of seam lines, because it just means more time you have to spend fettling something out. Okay. So you want to keep it.
What does fettling mean?
So fettling is cleaning up.
Okay, fine.
So we're always going to have like an overhang. Or like a,
sort of like the clay is going to bulge out a little bit when you've like...
Yeah. So you just clean those up afterwards.
Yeah.
So ideally, if you have more of those, it's just more time you have to spend cleaning up. And ideally, we don't want to spend too much time doing that. So yeah, this is like a relatively, and like this is obviously a more simpler shape because it's just 2-part.
Yeah.
Because you always have to think of like sort of undercuts or anything like that. So undercut is when... plaster will go underneath something and then it won't be able to remove from the mold.
It's kind of stuck.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why seam lines are super, super important.
Yeah.
If you don't get your seam lines right, you will not release the model from the mold.
So you really can't just design anything you want, however, like you have to think about the process.
Yes.
You have to think about the seam lines, you have to think about the undercuts, you've got to think about how you're going to make your master, how it's going to come out of the mold.
Yeah.
Like all of these considerations are really important.
Yes. And it's like sometimes I do mold making for other people, like other designers and stuff. And then sometimes when they come to me with a drawing or something, we have to really sort of, I wouldn't say simplify things down, but sort of scale things down slightly and
adapt it to what's
adapt
possible.
it so it's better for the mold. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I guess also like you could potentially have a really complicated piece that's like an 11-part thing.
Yes.
But then you would then have to consider in your time for like dealing with the fettling and stuff like that, and then that would increase the cost, etc. Whereas there might be like a couple of simple tweaks that you can do that will just like bring it down in terms of number of pieces, and then
so then once
economical
and that's the best way to be, right? So once you sort of mark through these sections off, then you can then start to pour your bits of plaster. So when you're doing the mold, you're obviously doing it section by section. And the best way to do it is you need to work out how you want to demold a piece. So how each part sort of comes off. So for these pieces here, I started off with the inner side first. So I cast this bit first, okay, and then I started to section all off and do the other parts.
Fine. What about this piece?
So this piece here, a little Roman Greco heads. This is let me remember, it's a 4-part mould, okay? So with this piece here, the face comes off, like that, and then the top of the head comes off, and then these 2 parts come off here, okay?
And that, you said it's quite important for the face to be sort of
Yeah, so the reason why we've done this separately, well, differently, is because I didn't want to have any seam lines across the face, because it's like a visual thing you first sort of see, and I quite like this detail of the broken nose, so I didn't want any sort of seam lines coming across this. So that's why I've done that side that comes off first. I mean, this took me actually quite a while to figure out of how I was going to do this.
Yeah.
And also the hair is a lot simpler as well. The hair almost seems it's quite detailed, but it's not. It's quite shallow.
Right.
So that allowed it to then be just a 4-part mould as well.
If you're starting from scratch and your aim is to make a plaster master, what would be your process then?
So, for instance, if I was making like a vase, in the typical sense we think of a vase, or like a cup, what I would do is I would either use a whirler, which is similar to like a ceramic wheel, but it's tabletop, and it's the oscillating wheel head itself is made of plaster. Or you would use a lathe. So like a wood lathe, it's a plaster lathe. So you pour let's say cylindrical logs of clay. And what you would do is you would use a thing called cottle. And cottle is basically, it's plastic sheeting. It's very malleable.
Okay.
And you would, so on the lathe, for instance, there's a chuck. So the chuck screws onto the lathe itself. So what I would do is take the chuck off. Then I would place my cottle over the top. Make sure it's properly like securely tightened as well. And then what I would do is I'm then pouring plaster into that void. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, essentially I'm using the cottle as a tube.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm with you.
So yeah, pouring plaster into there. Once that's set, which is sort of after 10 minutes, because I like to work with it, it's quite soft. I'll then peel the cottle off. That's done its job. Then I can screw it onto the lathe, and then I can start to turn.
And so what consistency does it have at that point?
So at that point, it's the consistency of, I would say, maybe like cheesecake. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So if I was using the plaster lathe, I would work with it a little bit harder, because obviously as you're working with the piece, as you're working with plaster, the harder it's getting because it's setting.
Yeah.
So if I was using the whirler, which is the tabletop lathe, what I would do is I would cottle over the wheel head itself.
Yeah.
And then I would work with that a lot quicker. So after a couple of minutes, once I poured my plaster, the best way to kind of tell is that it almost has a bit of like a marble sheen on top. That means I know it's absorbed all of the moisture, so it's able to hold itself.
Fine.
I can then take my cottle off, and then with that one, I've really only got about 10 minutes to work with it until it's like set and there's nothing else I can do.
Wow, okay. That is fast.
Yes, you have to be like really, really fast.
You've got to know exactly where you're going and what you want to do.
Yeah. And you can only really work in one direction, so you always have to like, the best way to explain it is like kind of mount your arm in and think of it as like a bit of armature that can't really move. So essentially you work from like 3 o'clock. I'm like holding my hand like I'm actually doing it. So yeah, and you work with like a metal plate or a kidney or a profile.
Like, turning in a way.
Yes, yeah. So it's similar to turning on a lathe, but instead we're doing it upright as opposed to horizontally.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Now you've got your master.
Yes.
And your master may be, it may be 3D printed or it may be in plaster, but you now need to get yourself to the mold stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So once we have our plaster master or our 3D printed master, I'll talk about the plaster master first. once you have your piece, you then need to treat the plaster, simply because if you pour plaster on top of plaster, I'm saying plaster so much, aren't I? Plaster, plaster, plaster. If you're pouring plaster on top of plaster, it will stick. So you need to add a release. So we use something called soft soap, and it's essentially sort of soap in its most basic form, but it's the only thing that plaster can really absorb. So what we do is we apply 3 very sort of liberal coats of that. And then once we apply it, straight away, the plaster is starting to absorb that. So there isn't a sort of like a gestation period of where we need to wait. We need to wait like 5 minutes and then you can sort of sponge it off. So as soon as it goes on, it can come straight off again. And then we do that 3 times, okay? Like magic rule, 3.
All in threes.
All in threes. So once we've done that, we can then start to sort of mark out where our seam lines is going to be if you haven't done that beforehand. It's really important to only actually use soft soap, because some people might use like Vaseline or Fairy liquid, and they do act as a good release. I was like, but the problem is it compromises the surface of your plaster.
Oh, okay.
So that's why we only use soft soap, because it's fully absorbed. So there is no sort of residue on top of your piece. Okay.
Yeah.
So
now you're marking out.
So now you're marking out, where everything needs to be. So, like I said before, if you find that your piece is even like by a couple of millimeters off, it won't release from the mold. So you need to really. This is like sort of the longest part as well of mold making.
Okay.
Is actually working out where your seam lines are and then the setting up. The actual like physical part of making the mold is actually relatively quick, but it's actually the setup time beforehand which is actually the longest. So for instance, because we just have this model here in front of us, I can explain better with this one here.
Yeah.
So I would section everything off, which I have done here. So we spoke about earlier about the seam lines.
Yeah.
For something like this, what I would do is I would then set this in clay. So what I would do is I would trace, essentially like with a pencil on the table, I would trace around this shape here, okay? I remove that shape, and then what I then do is I fill that space up with clay. So essentially is that I have like a 2D cross section, a 3D cross section of this shape here, okay?
Yeah.
What we then do is I would then box that up, and then I would pour my first bit of plaster, okay?
Yeah.
And the idea is for this first bit of plaster is just to act as an informant of like the first seam line, okay?
I mean, essentially what you're trying to do is basically prop this up in a way.
Yes.
So that everything exactly to the seam line is covered, and that only the top half will still be visible.
So it's like we're essentially like submerging half of it in plaster.
And it is very important that it is to the seam line exactly, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then because sometimes what I'll always do is I'll make them slightly bigger. So on this seam line here, there will be a slight gap. So I'll fill that in with clay, and then with a wooden knife, just clean that up so it's flush.
So attention to detail when it comes to that seam line.
Yes.
Okay.
And then once that's done, so we have our seam line, our plus sort of template, essentially what we've made as a template. I will then box this off. And then I can run my first half of plaster.
Right.
Okay?
So really everything that's below is not anything that you're going to keep.
No.
It's really only important just for where it meets, and it needs to be level as well where that seam line is, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And so then the actual mold is the thing that you're pouring on top.
Correct. You could like some people sometimes make their molds and they use clay.
Yeah.
But then.
Well, yeah, because I was going to ask. You said earlier that plaster sticks to plaster. So when you're pouring plaster on top, have you?
So I've treated this as well.
You've treated this as well. Okay, yeah.
Some people will make that out of clay, but they'll find that it's just very uneven. And it's always quite nice to have like clean sort of seam lines.
Yeah, because otherwise that's going to affect then the mold part that you're making.
So then once I've taken that off, sorry, keep that on. Once I've run that first bit of plaster, I can then flip that around.
Yeah.
And then I can remove that template, okay? that goes away. I don't need to use it ever again, essentially.
Fine.
And then I can then start to run off all my other parts. I'll put in my natches. So natches are essentially teeth or keys for the mold. So that when they are together, they lock.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they're not they're not sort of like loose pieces. I'll put my natches in, soft soap it again, and then run my other section of plaster against the boards again.
With that, okay.
So that's how like you slowly build a mold.
But so what happens with, because you said this was in 3 parts, and I can picture how that works with those 2, but then how do you work out this 3rd bit?
So the 3rd bit,
because you've got it flat, right? So you've managed to work out this. I guess,
I've worked out that bit
and then
there.
this other half.
I've actually explained that wrong, actually, to be fair. Now that you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, I missed out that bit. So, like I said, I made this bit here first, right? So what I did was, this part here would have been covered also in clay.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So then you can actually like remove that.
Yes.
And then I'm guessing that at some point, once you've worked out your 2 halves, you can then put it upright and then pour the last bit. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool.
Sorry, I should have said that.
No.
Bad teacher.
Testing you.
Yeah.
You've got your master, you've got your mould.
Okay.
And so then what's next? Because you paint on your pieces as well.
So also like...
the slip casting.
To mention, so when we've made our moulds, we need to wait about sort of a week and a half until they're dry. Because obviously we're mixing with water, because we don't want any moisture in the moulds. If we use our mould straight away, you'll find that we'll get lots of sort of what look like air bubbles on the surface of our mould. So we need to leave them in a very sort of dry place so all the water evaporates, and then you can then start to produce the pieces in ceramics. Okay.
So this is not a short process.
No. Mold making is quite long.
How long would you say? I mean, obviously there'll be like a whole stage of you designing the pieces, thinking about them, etc. But like, from the moment you like have a design, and I mean, I
would say from like have a design to the mold that you can use. Let's say 2 weeks. And then that's like depending how big or small it is, right? But let's just say 2 weeks. It could be a week and a half, could be longer. Let's say 2 weeks. And then from that point, then slip casting to then as you get a final piece out, maybe that's like, if you have a small kiln, you only want to run a few things off, let's say another 2 more weeks as well.
Yeah, so it's not like a super quick turnaround. And it also makes sense now when you were saying that you sometimes get orders of small runs, and someone brings a drawing to you, why it's worth spending the time right at the get-go, sort of working out the design, etc., because you don't want to be like trying to make a mold and then find that things don't work. Like it's worth spending that time right at the beginning to work out the process and think about the piece ahead of time.
So sometimes, like when people do come to me for a small batch production, I do like sometimes people I think they're quite surprised at how long ceramic actually takes, or how long sort of the process is.
You've left your mold pieces for a few days to completely dry out, and we're ready for slip casting.
Yes. So slip casting is clay, but in liquid form. Okay. So not traditionally how we think of clay, like a ball of clay. It's liquid. Couldn't explain that better. So what you do is when we're making a mold as well, you always have something called a feed. And that's basically essentially like the funnel in which you feed the liquid clay into. Okay. So when we are making a mold of anything, we always fill to the top of that feed. Okay. So the idea for the feed is that it runs. So the idea, just because
this is that bit.
That's that bit there, yeah. So that's where the feed sort of like screwed onto, okay?
Okay.
And it runs up about there. So we're pouring our slip. So the slip, comes all the way up past the model itself, and then you have an extra bit, okay? As we are casting, because the plaster mold is absorbing the slip, okay? That run of slip that we've just put in will gradually go down. okay? So you always need to keep an eye on it to make sure that it's always full. That's also why you have a feed. So it's always basically always full. These pieces are, so I do these in two, I do in earthstone or terracotta. Each different type of slip, so each type of material, will have a different casting time, because some are absorbed quicker and some absorb less. Terracotta is an earthenware clay, and that absorbs slower. So these actually run in there for about 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then I get a wall that's maybe a couple of mil thick.
Fine.
It's definitely less than 5 mil. So maybe
So you could leave it longer, but then it would be too thick and heavy.
Yeah, it would just be a bit too heavy.
And if you left it less, then it would be potentially very fragile because it wouldn't be thick enough.
And it might not survive the mould sometimes. Okay. So once we've left it in there for like, say, the terracotta pieces for half an hour, we then tip it upside down and then we pour all the slip out, okay?
Fine.
And then we leave it sitting like this. So
all the excess is basically drained out and your piece is now hollow.
Yes, and then all of that excess slip we obviously reuse. So I will pour that back into the original bucket it came in, and then when I set it to dry, you always set it upside down. So upside down is from the feed, okay? So then any excess drops falls at the bottom. So you basically have an even shelf. So essentially think of like an Easter egg, right?
Yeah.
It's an even shelf throughout the whole thing.
You should have started with Easter eggs.
I know, so yeah, then once that's done, for these pieces here, I will leave, for those pieces, I will leave them for a day.
Okay.
Just because they dry quite slowly, and I don't want to force anything out so it doesn't tear, essentially, because if it's too wet, it will just tear.
And that isn't like a maximum amount of time that you can leave them in, or
There is and there isn't. It depends on the way your mould is made.
Okay.
So because this piece here has this part here, okay, whenever you're pouring into a cavity of clay is always shrinking.
Yeah.
It's always shrinking into itself. Okay. So this piece here, where the candlestick holds in, that sort of comes out in the mould. So the slip, is gripping around that. Now, if I left that in there for a week, even if I left it there for like maybe 3 days, that would crack, because it's drying and it's shrinking against that sort of body of plaster. So that's why you have to. I always say this with mould making, so you have to get to know your mould. Each mould has a different personality and how it likes to work. So that's why if I pull that out in a day, it will come off. It will come off clean. It does have a bit of give into it, which is what we need to negotiate, but it will come off. If I left that any longer, it wouldn't come off at all. It would just completely stick on there.
Right. So some pieces you might be able to leave longer than others, but with this particular bit, because of the candle holder, like
Correct. Yes.
You can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
For instance, like the heads, I can leave them in there for
I was
weeks.
thinking the heads, like they don't really have anything, because they're going to shrink back
into
like
themselves,
that.
yes.
Whereas with this one, it's actually this little bit
Correct.
that's shrinking basically like forward into the mould and sort of pressing against it eventually.
Yes.
Gosh, I love all of this. Sorry, I've like forced you into teacher mode, but it's really interesting because there's just so much to consider, so much to know, so many different processes involved. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's also, I think it's because as well as that's that other part of ceramics that people don't realise is not necessarily an option, but like they don't really know much about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I guess it's probably quite hard. Like, you can get an introduction class to throwing or what's it called, slab building?
Slab building, any sort of hand building thing, yeah. But there's not very many classes
really, no, because it's such an involved and long process.
Yes.
It's not like you can turn up, and in a few hours walk away with something.
No.
I mean, I know already with, throwing, like you have to come back once they've bisque fired it or whatever. But yeah, this is even more, it's really cool. Yeah, so many stages. And so we're not even quite done, because now it comes out and you decorate it.
Yes. So I embellish quite a lot of my work. I think that's quite to say distinctive maybe sounds a bit pompous, like very, very distinctive.
Hey, you're allowed to be.
Because it's I embellish quite a lot of my work, and that's actually, I think, for me, the part I enjoy the most is actually, I think I enjoy like making a new mold of something, and then once I've had that, I'm like.
But I find that quite interesting as well, because I actually know some ceramicists who actually, they might only do the embellishments and they might collaborate with someone who throws or who does, mold making, and they might only do, so whereas you do everything from end to end. So I think that's really cool. But yeah, so how do you do the embellishment?
So it depends on like certain pieces. So a lot of the pieces I will do are with underglazes, which is a ceramic type of paint, essentially. It's called underglaze because it goes underneath the glaze. So you paint first and then you glaze on top.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like Maiolica or anything like that, where you're sort of painting with glaze or anything. And so a lot of my inspiration is sort of Roman Greco. You've probably all cottoned on. Couldn't tell.
I'm just looking at the one behind me and I'm like, yep. It's so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone else.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can either.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But yeah, so it is distinctive. Very much your thing. And yeah, so Greco-Roman.
Yeah. So I would always start off with a drawing, and I would then draw that until I would draw over and over and over again until I'm kind of happy with something. But I always work off a reference. And then I would always think about like sort of how I want it to sit on a piece of work or like in the plates. So that's like sort of underglazing. And then I might do, so this pieces here these are actually oxides. Which I actually mix with, right on cue, and take some water. Which I actually mix with cough medicine. Because it's a better medium.
No, genuinely?
Yeah, genuinely.
Oh, I thought you...
No. A little sponsor.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I mix that with a type of, like a clear cough medicine.
Yeah.
So it runs a lot better, because if you do this with water, sometimes the body absorbs it quite quickly and it will start to bleed. Whereas if I mix it with this cough medicine, it's more sticky, and the best way I can describe it is it runs off the paintbrush for longer.
Right.
So these are oxides. The only problem with oxides is that I can't, once it's on, I can't then, if I've made a mistake, it's kind of stuck there.
So you could potentially...
Similar to like a fresco, like in which it absorbs the pigment, that it kind of does the same with...
But so you could potentially spend ages making something.
Yeah.
And then...
Happens all the time.
And then, slip of the hand.
I'm like, oh no.
No.
So yeah, they're the two sort of types of decoration that I do mainly.
Yeah.
So underglazing and then oxide decoration as well.
So you've fired this once already, and then you do the underglazing decoration.
So it depends on which ones I'll do. So on any sort of plates that I'll make, if I'm using underglaze, I will always paint to them at greenware.
Okay.
I'll paint them at greenware because sometimes I find that it will act as if you don't paint them at greenware, once you paint them at bisque, which is after the first firing, so there's 2 firings in ceramics, 1000 degrees, generally a bisque, and then you fire it higher for the glaze firing. If I was to paint onto bisqueware and then straight away glaze it, I sometimes find the glaze doesn't properly adhere to the freshly painted underglaze because it acts as a bit of a barrier. So I always like to paint them at greenware, which is when they're essentially raw, and then fire them and then glaze them.
Okay.
Whereas if I'm using oxides, I will always paint a bisque because it then means I can sometimes properly trace onto a plate and then draw over that.
Okay.
Not necessarily with these heads, but...
Gosh, so even once you've got, like, the embellishment itself, there's a lot of process involved.
Yeah.
And actually, you did say with plates, and these, you actually said this is not slip casting. This is the only time where you actually do use a slab of clay.
Yes.
And what was it? You said you roll it out?
So I roll out a slab of clay, and then these are made on hump molds. So a hump mold is
presented.
Yeah, a hump mold is it's what I made earlier. A hump mold is a plate in which you are, if you think of it as like casting, you're casting the inside of the plate. So when I'm layering it on, I'm layering this on upside down. So in the mold, it goes like that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
And then I'll then trim around the edge, cut it, and then leave that to set or dry.
Fine.
I'll leave that to dry for like, if I can, on my mold, I'll try and get 2 out in the day. So I will cast roll out a slab first thing in the morning, press them on. And then just before I'm about to leave, I'll take that off and then press another one on.
Okay.
So it's a lot slower.
Okay, so let's talk more about your Greco-Roman obsession.
Okay. I always find it's so like cliche. It's like first generation Italian. It's like, what are you interested in? Like, Italy. Which I think is quite like funny. But I was like, I don't know, kind of feel like it's
So you're first generation Italian?
Yeah, so my family's from Sicily.
Okay.
Which I think maybe like the Greek-Roman thing kind of comes from, because Sicily was once a Greek, conquered by the Greeks, then conquered by the Romans. But most of the temples in Sicily are Greek.
And presumably you've grown up sort of regularly visiting. And
yeah, so we'd go back every year for the summer, and on the way to the beach, so we're from Agrigento. So if you imagine Sicily's almost like a bit of like an arrow shape. It's south east, but kind of relatively sort of in the middle of the island.
Fine.
And there's a place called Valle dei Tempi, which is Valley of the Temples, and there's like lots of like amazing temples that are still standing. So driving to the beach like most days, we'd have to pass that. So I was always like, I think it's always been like quite sort of ingrained in me.
Yeah. I don't think that's a stereotype. It's what you've grown up with, you know, in the same way that I'm inspired by like, you know, I was raised in Paris and I grew up visiting the Louvre and visiting, you know, like the museums that were around me. And it's like, yes, I guess to some people it might seem cliche, but like, you know, your childhood has an impact on you.
No, yeah, for sure. I kind of didn't think it did until like I've got older. But like even as a child, like, I was really obsessed with like, there's like 1950s like epics.
Yeah.
Like those Roman epics. I mean, I was like absolutely enthralled by all of those.
Love that.
Like loved the sets and everything. So I was like, you know, why don't we live like this anymore? So yeah, it's always been like a source of inspiration for me, and I'm always more sort of drawn. I'm always more sort of drawn to that in sort of anything. So I don't even necessarily have to be going to like a museum. I can also be like just walking around London, for instance, and find inspiration from like, I don't know, neoclassical buildings or, you know, sort of a beautiful plate or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I guess that's the thing, because a lot of your childhood inspiration or like memories are from Sicily, but because everyone has taken inspiration from, you know, the Grand Tour is like that classic thing. So then it's like pervasive in everything, you know, the architecture here, and there's a lot of like, then it's kind of like cross-reference and cross-influence. So you'll find the Greco-Roman in like the most unlikely of places, like, you know, somewhere up in Scotland or something, and you're like, oh, that's Greco-Roman, even though it's like so far removed from, you know, the original place.
Yeah. So that's where I find like most of my inspiration from. And even like now I find myself like, if I'm trying to design something, it's always trying about reinterpreting sort of like antiquities into a bit more of like a modern setting, I think. At least that's always like my starting sort of reference point. It might really evolve from that. But generally that's always my reference point.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's inescapable. It is a part of me. It's who I am.
And urns. Can we talk about urns?
Yeah, let's do, please.
I love how you got this big smile on your face right away.
God.
You guys, we really do need the cough syrup sponsor for this video.
God. Yeah, I don't know why, but even as like a child, I was kind of like really, I mean, it's still like really quite drawn to them. There's some like great ones in the V&A as well.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. Like the V&A gets mentioned every interview.
Yeah, it is really good.
Like I don't think there's been a single person. Yeah, but even beyond ceramics,
yeah, true.
It's just I think every maker just gravitates.
Yeah, I think we are really spoiled here in London. There are lots of great museums that are free. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's something quite evocative I find about urns or sort of large Grecian-like urns. I think it's because it's almost like harking back, or it's like almost like a direct sort of channel.
Yeah. But there is something, urns. It's quite like majestic. So I'm looking at an urn behind you. There's like majestic, elegant. It's got presence.
Yeah, they're quite romantic pieces, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of what I'm kind of like drawn to as well. And I quite like the sort of different, again, like I'm big on ornamentation, like I love that. Mm-hmm. I'm not a minimalist any way, shape or form. Do you know what I mean? It's never going to be me. So yeah, I love like all the detailing on them. Mm-hmm. Like the beautiful sort of handles, like they could be like snakes or they could be sort of vines. I think there's something quite beautiful about the proportions of sort of large vessels or urns, from like the foot, very like sort of dainty sort of feet, and then quite robust body. Yeah, I just think they're quite beautiful.
So when did you make your first one?
When did I make my first one? Well, I studied...
I'm wondering how far back the obsession goes.
Yeah, no, I was like... I did my first one. That sounds funny. I did a 2-year foundation course in Kingston many years ago. It was about learning old craft techniques. So we sort of touched on different sort of craft techniques like sand casting, wood lathe, and I was kind of drawn to each project because basically that's what I wanted to make. Was like I just wanted to make sort of really large urn. It was like Napoleon complex. You know what I mean? I was like, gotta make it big. It's gonna be huge, guys. It's gonna be massive. And yeah, I think that's the first time I made one. So I made the model out of wood. Mm-hmm. From like loads and loads of bits of wood. I made it in sections. It was very, very long and laborious. And then, made that first one. So what was that? That was maybe like 15 years ago, I think. Mm-hmm. But if I look back at it now, it's like awful. Like, oh God, it's so bad. But I was obsessed with it at the time. I was like, this is amazing.
And I love that. It's wonderful. And I mean, isn't it a good thing that you can improve from your first urn?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
As opposed to like, masterpiece, I can retire now, I'll never make something better.
Yeah. But then it's funny because then I actually ended up going from that course, I ended up going to Central St Martin's and joining their second year there. And then again, a lot of sort of like classical influenced stuff. I was making like sort of large tureens with like vines embellished on them. And then I remember once my tutor was like, have you actually properly looked at the vases, like, and seen how they're made? And I was like, I don't think I probably actually cottoned on. Mm-hmm. So then I went to the V&A and like actually looked at like each sort of different part and component, how they're all made, because they're all made in separate smaller pieces and then joined together.
Yeah.
Which is amazing because you kind of look at them and you think, oh, there's just all made, it's like one single piece, but it's actually not. It's actually lots of different parts then added.
I kind of love that you were so like tunnel visioned
about
the urn that you didn't stop to think about how it was made.
I was like, just trying to make it like one whole thing.
Yeah.
And my tutor was like, I don't think that's the best way to do it. I was like, well, that's why I'm here.
So is it about the ceramics, or is it more about the Greco-Roman theme? Is the ceramics almost more like a conduit to making that?
I think so, yeah. I think whenever I'm designing something, obviously I want the piece to be functional, or decorative or whatever. But sometimes I feel like when I'm designing something, I don't think I'm really designing it in ceramics. I think I'm designing for a room or a sort of mood or something. I think I'm more designing for an interior space, I think, than actual like a ceramic mug that I want someone to have some tea out of. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of my angle at coming in. I think that's why I reference quite a lot of things from the past and trying to reinterpret it into, I suppose, a modern setting. Because I think actually later on, maybe I'd like to move into more, well, I'd actually like to move more into sort of out of ceramics and more into like maybe glass or soft furnishings or furniture. Obviously with the Roman Greco theme. So yeah, I think at least for the ceramics is maybe, not, I wouldn't say it's secondary, that's totally wrong, but it doesn't always have to be made from ceramics, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I think maybe having my own studio now is allowing me sort of really kind of to think that through about what else I really want to be making.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think, you've had some collaborations.
Yes.
I'm thinking, is it with Gerge?
So yeah, Gerge Erde, we did an urn together, which was great. Yeah, he came to me, he approached me and he was like, I'm interested in making a capsule collection. So actually, because I normally sort of embellish or ornament my work, the kind of was I designed the shape and then he actually, he painted all of them, like beautifully painted. And he's like, he has a very sort of signature style, I would say. And yeah, so he painted them. I think we did 5. Yes, we did 5 urns together. So it was all, I made them, the urns in they're sort of modular shapes, but then put together. So some of them were taller than others. Some of them had handles. Some of them had smaller bases.
And he is in the interior as well, so you're kind of like moving into that direction. Yes. You then did a collaboration with Robson.
So Robson Stannard, yeah. So he's, I would say, oh God, I hope we get this right. He's a painter, but also like sort of does like collage pieces as well. He does these like really beautiful poppies, which he then cuts out and then collages on. And he has this technique where he will use several colours on a paintbrush and then sort of push those colours through.
Oh, that's how he does it. That's really cool.
So we made some sort of larger serving plates.
Yeah.
And again, some of these Roman Greco heads, which he then embellished.
And did Gerge and Robson already work in the Greco-Roman theme?
I would say Gerge Erde does, yeah.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
But I wouldn't say Robson does, no.
Fine.
No. His is more abstract.
Fair.
But I thought there was something quite beautiful about his...
Like bringing two styles together.
In a sort of bit more... I think to make my pieces, they almost feel so different because they feel more contemporary because they have these like sort of poppy motifs on them.
Yeah. And your latest collaboration is with Max?
Yes, I'm doing a furniture project with a furniture designer called Max McClintock.
Okay.
And for the first time, actually, I'm going to be, we're designing something together, and then I will be embellishing.
So the other way around to your previous collaborations.
Which I'm actually really excited for. It's quite nice to see. It's quite, well, I suppose it's quite nice for me to use a different medium. And yeah.
Yeah, because then that means you're, and also what's quite exciting, I guess, because you're talking about still using ceramics, but also working in things other than ceramics.
Yes.
So if you're the one doing the embellishments, then it is already doing that. So you have the role of the designer, right? And that's kind of, which is exciting.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It was quite nice to work out a shape and then because I proposed from the design stuff we were going to do and kind of mapping that out on on a drawing to be like, well, how would this work? How is it going to all fit together?
Yeah. Did you have to think in terms of, how when you were describing the different stages of your process and how you've got to always bear in mind, how the process affects or interacts with the design, and you've got to consider that when you're designing. Did you similarly have to consider certain things from what Max makes, and did you have to sort of educate you on his processes so that you could bear those in mind when designing with him? Yeah,
because I think we both kind of understood that if these pieces are going to be decorated, we kind of need larger sort of flat surfaces. So I think that was kind of our understanding on both parts of like what we kind of need to do and the size of motifs which we want to sort of put onto the furniture as well. So that's from like the thicknesses of the legs, how many legs we want, for instance, or like faceted sides, like how thick would those sort of be? Could we fit something in that? Could we fit like a sort of a Roman key within that, or is it just going to be on the surface? So yeah, definitely like a sort of a new way of negotiating something.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And so kind of, yeah, I guess you're moving towards interiors more and more. What would be then a dream commission for you?
Dream commission. Do you know what? I'd love to help design sorry, like sort of a boutique hotel.
Ooh.
Like a lobby bar. It would be quite chic. Or
Chic,
maybe
but also theatrical, right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to think, who's that? Now his name's escaped me, but I really love...
Luke Edward Hall, maybe?
Yeah, his work's amazing too, but the set designer, why is his name?
Oliver Messel.
Oliver Messel, yes.
Yeah.
As soon as you have theatrical, I was like, yeah, I love his theatricality.
Yeah. And he was both a set designer for stage as well as at the Dorchester,
yes,
where I used to work. There's
the Oliver Messel suite there as well, isn't there?
Yeah. There's the suite and there's an event room.
Oh, okay.
And they're beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's not to everyone's taste, but I think it's actually coming back into taste now, which is quite an exciting thing.
Yes, I love his work. Sometimes I always reference his stuff as well, which I don't think sometimes always like translates over, but I just find it quite inspirational just looking at it. Just like visually, it's so beautiful. It's funny, when I was younger, I actually wanted to be a set designer. I think I wanted to be many things, but one of them was a set designer. So yeah, really love his work. It's great.
And so if you're thinking about like interiors versus set design, like what is your heart leaning more towards now?
I mean, I would say if I was designing a room, I would consider it like a set. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's how I see my own house. Like, when I'm buying things, I see it within a set. I think.
Damn, we should have filmed at your house. I wonder what it's like now.
No. That's not what I'm saying. But I do. When I was younger, I watched like quite a lot of like old like black and white films and like these sort of like grand houses.
Yeah.
And it's like, although it's such like typically a set, but it's a set for sort of a drama that's going to unfold. And I think that's kind of how I think of interiors, as a set.
Where life unfolds.
Yeah. So, you know, full of the beautiful people.
I love that. So where do you see yourself in 5 years' time then?
Oh, interesting. I think I see myself in 5. Well, what I would like to sort of move into is becoming a bit more of a studio / sort of brand. And then sort of so collaborating on a lot more things. I think I'm more interested in designing things, and at least at this specific moment, physically making them.
Yeah.
So I'm actually designing some tea towels at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one's going to be Helen of Troy, and the other one is Achilles. So that's been really fun to think about sort of, I mean, I know it's a tea towel, but it's quite nice designing on sort of fabric and how they're going to be printed, whether they're going to be silk screen or like, oh, shoot, I just lost my train of thought.
Digital printing.
Or digitally printed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think I want to move sort of more into that. So becoming a bit more of a studio, sort of multimedia sort of pieces. I really would like to make some sort of bronze-like or a sort of like light fixture as well. So yeah, I think maybe that's where I want to see myself moving in 5 years' time. So at least like leaning towards that sort of end of a studio / brand.
So could you imagine yourself being like the head designer of your own brand with people
Correct.
working for you, and maybe you have someone who's working in ceramics and someone making the bronze things,
Yes.
etc. And you're sort of overseeing it all, but you're focusing on the design elements.
Aspects. Yeah, for sure.
That's really cool.
Fingers
I like
crossed.
that. Yeah, I like that. It's a good ambition.
Thanks.
It's really nice. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, just the whole thing of talking through the process from start to finish was really, really interesting. But then also, you know, that at the end you're talking about wanting to become a studio/brand, like that's a really exciting, kind of unexpected, for me anyway, direction, but a really cool one. So I hope that pans out.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been really great. Thanks a lot for coming down.
I really enjoyed getting into the technical details of mould making, so I hope you enjoy that as well. I've linked Giuseppe's website below, and I can't wait to see the result of his collaboration with Max McClintock, as it'll be his first furniture collaboration, which is quite exciting. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word, like, comment, share and subscribe. See you next week.
Hello.
Hi, Giuseppe.
Hey, how are you?
Oh my god, my voice just went weird. Hi, Giuseppe.
Hello.
Thanks for having me. We're here in your studio. Oh my god, what am I doing? Honestly. That is going to be for blooper. I just know it. It's going to be me like repeating the same word 3 times. Anyway.